On the maritime domain awareness side of it, and the IMO defines it as the effective understanding of any activity associated with maritime domain that could impact on the security, safety, economy, and the environment. And part of our requirement is also to have to make communications and interact with vessels and monitor coastal and offshore activities. Our search and rescue region, that's the purplish color if you can see it, is fairly large. And for those that don't know, South Africa's land area is 1.2 million square kilometers, whereas the maritime search and rescue region is 27.7 million square kilometers. In other words, our maritime area is 23 times larger than the land area. And there aren't any roads at sea, so it's just water. And all the sea maritime areas have, each country has a responsibility for search and rescue. So if you're looking at the screen and you see the colors, to the west of South Africa, you've got a green color, and that's Brazil's responsibility. There's a thin sliver of a light blue, that's Uruguay. And then further south is the dark blue, that's Argentina. And then to the east of the country, the yellow area is La Réunion or France. And a little bit further to the east, the light blue, that's Australia. So there is no spot on the ocean where nobody's responsible. There is always someone responsible. South Africa, it must be noted, also assists Namibia, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Comoros with search and rescue issues. The picture you're seeing there now is from our operations center, the MRCC center. So the top top left with the SATCOM's aerial, so we can talk to ships via Inmarsat. And then you can see on the right, there's a lady using the system. And the bigger pictures with all the screens is the different display systems that we have and monitor. It must be to be advised that there's always at least 2 persons in that office anytime, day, night, Christmas Day, everything. There's always somebody there. We've had a difficult time with COVID as well to ensure that the MRCC personnel are safe. So we had to take extra measures to ensure that they remain safe so they could stay on duty, because there are not many people in this country that can do this function. And I'll move on. Oops, sorry. The shipping, South African shipping, you can see there the picture, and people always ask me, well, how do you see all the ships? And so because our area of responsibility is so huge, we have to make use of satellite tracking of vessels within our search and rescue region. And this is actually just a snapshot of the Southern African shipping, and typically from the equator down. And in that picture, you're seeing at any instant about 4,500 vessels displayed there. And for those that don't know, the slightly darker blue around the coastline is our exclusive economic zone. That's about 200 miles from the coast. The color dots just represents the different types of vessels like cargo, tankers, fishing, passenger vessels, tugs, and so forth. Sadly, each year SAMSA issues this marine notice, and it's normally in the first week or 2 of January, reflecting the previous year's fisher deaths. This is just fishers over the various SAMSA principal offices areas. So when you see Saldanha, Cape Town, Mossel Bay, and so on, the principal officer covers specific areas. And many will know that safety is most important at sea, especially for the smaller vessels. So the focus is on safety equipment. Many of you will know from annual surveys that safety equipment and the vessel is checked before a certificate is issued. And again, as has been said before, one fisher lost at sea is one too many. And we've had 389 in the last 20 odd years. Under fishing safety, South Africa, along with many maritime countries around the world, have a problem with fisher safety, primarily on the smaller vessels. And the MRCC, for example, often receive a phone call from a family member stating that the husband or father has not returned home from sea. And the biggest problem faced by the MRCC is not knowing where to start looking. So they will question the caller or ask, is there another person who knows where the fisher went, or out of which area did they launch, and which direction were they headed? And so it becomes difficult to get helicopters and NSRI boats out unless you know where they need to go. So the problem is, where do you start looking? So if you do not have an estimated position, you can't send anything anywhere. However, with this project, which we call the Identifier project, is just a little device. More information will come in the next couple of slides. SAMSA received some great assistance from the UK Space Agency and Exact Earth, which is a satellite AIS company, and received these identifiers. You'll see a picture of them just now. And the proper name for these devices, that's just the maker's name. The proper name from under the International Telecommunications Union it's called an autonomous maritime radio device, which means it just transmits, it has no receiver. And this device will also transmit on one of the AIS frequencies so that other vessels can actually detect them. And that was one of the problems that some of the fishing vessels have, is when their lights are off, the big ships can't see them and run over them. So the question is, how does this all work? So SAMSA has provided over 900 of these devices to the coastal fisher communities from Port Nolloth all the way around to beyond, a little bit past Port Elizabeth. And these devices have to be programmed with an MMSI number from ICASA, which we've applied for, and there are costs associated and pardon me, and annual license fees, which SAMSA will cover for the subsistence fishers. And typically, SAMSA coordinates a maritime community meeting with one or two of the surveyors. For example, they go to Lambert's Bay, go to a hall or a venue where SAMSA explains how the system will work, how to charge the system, how to use it, etc., etc. It's fairly easy to use. And I'll show you a few. I'll actually do a quick demo for you once I pull back from the screen. And it's a simple system to use. There's no fancy gadgets or numbers or codes to use. You click it in, it switches on by itself, and if you're in trouble, you press a button and the alert is sent. So what is SAMSA doing about all of this? SAMSA and the NSRI have teamed up on the West Coast. And I must say, we are working very well together on this issue. And it was felt that the entire fishing communities should be involved and informed. So education programs have been organized by the NSRI people, and they have a particular person that works on the West Coast who encourages the fishers to use the device, explains to the spouses or family as to the purpose of it. And in addition, this information is also shared with the learners at school. Why? Because we want to save lives. Sometimes the mobile phone is out of range, or has a flat battery, etc., And what can the fisher do without a communication device? They will just be drifting out at sea and hopefully someone will see them. This is where this device comes in to assist. To send an alert to a satellite, and interesting enough, the information is actually received in Canada, the owners of the satellites. And this alert message is then rerouted to South Africa and to the MRCC. And all this can happen within 5 to 10 minutes of pressing that button. There's a number of satellites that the system has. Now, as in earlier, as I said, we don't know where to start looking. But as soon as the guy presses his button, it sends an alert message which gives a position. It's sent to the MRCC, and now MRCC knows exactly where this boat is. What we would also do is when we issue these devices, and I'll give you a bit more details in the next slide or two, as to how we contact people, and we would know which would be the nearest NSRI station, or we will speak to the Emergency Operations Center, which is based in Cape Town. That's the NSRI's Operation Center, so that we can coordinate the rescue. And if needs be, in an emergency, if it's, for example, late afternoon and the sun is setting, you don't want people in the water. So we will work with the Air Force as well to get helicopters. We've had, interesting enough, a number of false alerts. And there's always people that like to press the button and see what happens. And they often get they're quite astounded when 5 minutes or 6 minutes later, they get a phone call to saying, are you in trouble? They say, no. I said, but why did you press the button? They say, oh no, that was a mistake. But at least we know the system works. So we say, you don't need to test the system. The system's actually working. But what we've also discovered with the previous project going back maybe 5-6 years is that many of, especially in African coastline, many of these countries suffer the same problem of their small boats go out, they get caught in bad weather and no one knows where to look. So we have also assisted with a limited number of these devices and provided them free of charge to Namibia, Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, Senegal, the Gambia, and Tristan da Cunha for them to test and see if it works for them. So this is what the device looks like. I'm going to pull back a little bit so you can actually see in my hand. It's not very big. It sits in a black bracket, and the orange bit can twist out like that. So all you do is you put it in, twist it, and as you hear a click, it switches on. And if it's outside for at least 5 minutes, it'll pick up the GPS signal, and then this device knows where it is. So when you press this red button, hold it down for 10 seconds, the light will flash red, and it'll send the alert signal. And then within the 5 to 10 minutes, going via satellite to Canada, to us, we would know where you are. So that's what was done. And that actually worked quite well. A number of the vessels are using it now. And I'll move to the next slide. So this is how we've been doing it in a number of fishing communities. So you, pardon me, top left, as I said, the Elandsbaai, and you've got Streysbaai, Gansbaai, Paternoster, etc. So we show them the device, how to use it, how to charge it. And this particular orange one, the identifier, requires the battery to be charged at home in an electrical socket, which is possibly a bit of the downside of the device. It works perfectly, but you need power to charge it up. And some of the vessels that should be using it, because of the risk, when they're out at sea, and when the fog closes in, and the engines cut out, and they can't do anything, so at least we can find them. So that's the idea. And also some pictures of the top left, you can just see that little white circle around the aerial, the identifier, the families, they coordinate from time to time to explain to the people what these devices are for and to encourage them, the fishers, to use them. And then the bottom ones also school children get taught, and the NSRI have spent a lot of time and effort in drafting a little program for the West Coast educators from the NSRI to go to the schools and explain to them so that they can also maybe remind Papa when he goes out to sea to take his device. Because sometimes the papas forget about these things. And this is kind of normally for the youngsters, they're like, pardon me, graphics and things like that. And when you start talking about satellites, then their eyes pop open because they're very interested in these kinds of things. So that explains to them how the whole system works. And the high schoolers as well, they also get shown how these things work. The top right picture, the lady with the blue, that's the NSRI lady that works on the West Coast for the NSRI and explains to the family. And she also teaches them some first aid, so they get a little bit of extra safety. And then the bottom right was actually off Arniston, the one group we went to meet there as well. So we hand out the device, we explain how to use it, we get their telephone numbers, mobile numbers, home address, everything like that, and that's stored in a database at the MRCC. So if this is triggered, we see the number, we look in the database, we get the information, we know which boat, which people, we phone, etc., to make sure that it is a valid alert. And then others with their boat, with their devices fitted. And even if you drive down the road, you don't need to take it down, it'll still work. And we need to think safety. So these is a couple of pictures from the NSRI with the rescues they have performed. And I don't think, pardon me, anyone would like to be in that top left picture out in the open ocean, sitting on top of your upturned boat, hoping to be rescued. Sadly, a number of people have died because they didn't have a device, they couldn't phone in time, or there was no signal, and they probably were drowned. And the NSRI, again, does fantastic work in getting out to the rescue. And what some people don't know, that all those on those NSRI vessels are all volunteers. They are not paid to do this job. They are pure volunteers. So again, we keep saying to the fishers, use the device so you can be saved. These people are not paid to come and rescue you. They're doing it voluntarily. And they're doing an excellent job. And near most of the launch sites where these boats go out, you will see on the right side there, the symbol says, make sure you take your device with you. But times are changing. Those devices that I showed you, the orange one, that's probably a good 5, 6, 7 years old. And technology is improving. And believe it or not, there is a South African company based in the Cape that has designed and is manufacturing a new AMRD device, and they call their device Angelfish. Not sure how they got to that name. And you can see at the bottom middle the name, Stone 3 Communications. I'm going to pull back a little bit. This is a device they designed. And you can see it's got a plastic cover, but inside they've got strips of solar panel. So this one does not need to be charged at home. You fit it on your vessel and it'll work. As long as the sun shines on it for 3-4 hours in a day, it'll work for a couple of days. You don't need to take it down. And you can see the wording there that says what size and so on. Then I'll show you the latest version. Which looks like this. There's a little aerial top and bottom, so that's all that screws in. This is the size of it next to my hand, and I've got a small hand. So it's like a big mobile phone size. And that's all it is. It's got the solar panel. So once you fit it, it'll work. This one will, with 4 to 5 hours of sun, will operate for up to 10 days without any other sunshine on it. And this is the changes in technology that is coming about. So this is what's available for fishers. Some recommendations now. We have been advised by our MRCC chief that search and rescue services are free, but if abused, charges can be incurred. For example, different sizes of vessels may only go a certain distance offshore depending on the size of the vessel, its safety equipment, etc., etc. And so if a vessel is limited to be operating 1 mile off the coast, and they somehow land up 10 miles off the coast, then the question is asked, what are they doing out there? And if they run out of fuel, then they say they need to be rescued. And that's not a rescue, that's abuse of the system. We need to make every effort to also inform search and rescue authorities as soon as possible. If you're in doubt, first call. If you manage to resolve your problem, you can always call again to say, no, we've solved our problem, you can stand down. But don't wait until you're falling in the water to try and press a button. Then it's too late. And the majority, again, of our SAR operations are for small vessels. And again, a note, the NSRI crew who rescue you are all volunteers. To the subsistence fishers, pardon me, these devices like the Identify or the Angelfish, and there's other systems, are important and reduce time spent on searches if an emergency happens. As said earlier, using of radios and cell phones to report to shore-based contact we can notify emergency service such as MRCC, the NSRI, TNPA Port Control also sometimes receive messages, and then they can share that with the search and rescue organizations to know where to go and look. And informing some shore person of intentions is also helpful. So which area of fishing and any other changes, the number of people on board, are they carrying their safety equipment like life jackets, flares, etc. For the commercial fishers, they also need to ensure that the emergency equipment such as flares, life jackets, sea anchor, etc. is with them before they go to sea. Notify the search and rescue authorities as soon as possible if there's any danger. Many vessels are not required to carry an EPIRB, but if you're able to, it is recommended because it can also trigger so we can find you. And then also equally important is proper registration and regular updating of your EPIRB information, especially when you're changing boats, etc., so that we have the correct contact details. Oftentimes when someone's in trouble, we say, oh, we've got that EPIRB number, we phoned the person, and the person said, no, but my husband sold that boat 5 years ago, but it's still got the old name. So we need to keep up to date with if there's any changes. And for those vessels that have digital selective calling channel 70, that can also be used for emergencies at sea. And some additional information. What else can we do? SAMSA has been considering making these AMRD, these devices, a requirement for every vessel that goes out to sea. But the costs were quite high. However, technology keeps improving and costs dropping. So SAMSA seeks to ensure safety of fishers. So an AMRD, or this device, may be a safety requirement, just like flares, life jacket, etc. So maybe in the not too distant future, that will be on your list to be checked by a SAMSA surveyor before they give you a certificate of fitness, like that. And subsistence fishers may receive assistance on this item. What we are aiming to do is to approach government to provide or subsidize the cost for the subsistence fishers alone. The others would have to pay for their device as part of their safety equipment. But that's a little bit down the road at the moment. But the device is available, and they can be made in Cape Town and used and detected by the satellites as well. As you know, we have 10 provinces, believe it or not, and the 10th province is Maritime, which is the biggest one. And lots of people forget about it. And so a big thanks on the search and rescue side of the issues to our MRCC, as well as to the NSRI for playing a massive role in saving fishers' lives at sea. I thank you. Bongi.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks, Carl. Carl, I believe that your presentation was quite straightforward and understandable. I'm saying that because there are very few questions that are coming. But what I've taken from your presentation, Carl, is the confirmation that the identifiers, they played a bigger role on reducing the time for session ratio. And I believe that people that have installed the identifiers, they can attest to that. And Carl, you've also alluded to the fact that SAMSA does search and rescue and not policing.
Correct.
So if for whatever reason people feel that the identifiers are meant to police, then we need to extend our education, awareness, and training so that people could understand that this is for their safety. It's not for policing purposes.
Correct.
And I quote you verbatim, Carl, when you're saying, use the device so you can be safe.
Yep. I just want to add a few words there, because I was clicking between two presentations there. As I said, we handed out 800 or over 800 of these devices. But interestingly enough, many were taken, received, they filled in the forms, and they never switched it on once in over 2 years. So what we're looking to do as SAMSA and going to talk to the boat surveyors is to then saying, but we can give you a list of those who took the devices, haven't switched them on, call a meeting and saying, well, if you're not going to use it, hand it back to us, because these devices are on loan to these fishers, because SAMSA has to pay the cost of the license fees and the MMSI numbers to ICASA and not the fishers. So that if they're not going to use it, we'll take it back and give it to someone that wants to use it. Thank you.
Wow. Carl, what could be the reason of them not switching them on?
It's hard to say. When you talk to some of them, and again, it's that suspicion of being spied on. And when you're saying you're going to spy on me, creates the assumption on our side is that, well, if you think we're spying on you, you must be doing something wrong. One of the guys that came up with the stories to saying, well, no, these subsistence fishers, is that the fish don't go where they are allowed to go. So sometimes the fishers, let's say your boat is limited to 5 miles offshore, but the fishers at 7 miles And they find themselves, well, they're saying, well, I can't go back home. I've got to put food on the table. So I go out further. And then they land up in trouble. And so this is some of the reasons why they don't like to switch it on. Interesting enough, the vessels of Arniston, Cape Agulhas way, they are very keen to use whatever is available because they always seem to be landing up in trouble with the big ships going around Cape Agulhas. And so if they have a device, they're quite happy because now they can be seen by the big ships and not being run over. So it depends on which area and what species the fishermen are going for, where the problem is.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Carl, on a lighter note, you have a secret admirer. Someone says you have the voice for the radio, so you must consider radio as a next profession.
And not TV. Okay, I'll take that.
Okay, Carl, I have a few questions. One from Pedro, my favorite person. Pedro is asking all the good questions. Are the AMRD devices waterproof and designed to self-trigger in the event of a small vessel capsizing?
Most of these devices are waterproof, so they can fall in the water, but the idea is not to automatically trigger an alert. So you still need to press it. So which is what we were saying a little bit earlier, is that if you feel you're in trouble and not as the boat is flipping over to press the button. But we can approach the problem is you've got to fit these things clear of their working area. So it tends to be, let's say, about 1.5 meters to 2 above where they operate. So you put on like a little plastic pole, stick it up there, and it'll work. And the South African version, you don't even have to take down, you can just leave it there. As long as there's sunshine for 4 or 5 hours, it'll work for up to 10 days. You are able to trigger it as well, this new device, but it's a manual operation. But we can chat with the providers of this device to see whether there is some kind of measure that they can use that if they do capsize without being able to press the button, that somehow the alert can be triggered. But I'll check with them.
Okay, thanks, Carl. The general question, Carl, is that do we have stats of how successful these devices have been and what is the future of the program? I remember you mentioned angel fish as well as identifiers. So yeah. What is the future of the program?
The project was with the identifiers, which has terminated over a year ago. It was for a set period. The two parts to the story is that the device and the satellite tracking system worked perfectly. The other side of the story that didn't work so perfectly is the fishers using it. So I said we've had probably just under a third of those devices issued that were not switched on once. So this is why I'm saying we need to go back to those people to saying, well, if you're not going to use it, give it back to us and we'll give it to somebody else. So the device and the software in the identifier is the same software in the new South African version. So it will still be tracked and detected, and that so regardless of whether the vessel is in the middle of the ocean or 1 mile off the beach, we'll be able to pick it up and know where the vessel is. Pardon me.
Okay. Thanks, Carl. Carl, that's it from my side. I don't have any further questions for your presentation. I guess colleagues will continue to ask questions via the chat room, and the respective colleagues, they will respond as and when. Thank you, Carl, and thanks for sharing your experiences as well as the journey that you've gone through with the integration of the identifiers as well as your other experiences with regards to station rush 2. Colleagues, in the interest of time, I must apologize that much time has been taken by the technological glitch that we had. We won't have any lunch break, unfortunately. We'll now move on to the next presentation from Captain Gustav Lowe, who's the regional manager of the Western region. Gustav, are you ready?
Yes, you can put the presentation up and I'm ready to go.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Bongi. It's a good thing that we covered level 2 now because I see you had a nice bath and new clothes and makeup and everything on. Very pretty. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm sure you would have loved to see the boating manager who was supposed to present it, but unfortunately she got other obligations and she's not here today, so I volunteered that I will present the presentation. Okay, so without any further ado, let's go to page 1 of the presentation as the introduction. Thank you. Pauline.
Press the button at the bottom of the bottom.
Oh, next. That one. Ah, okay. This is. Apologies for that. I'm still new to the webinar scenario. I'm used to Teams. So this is something new I'm learning. So anyway, the presentation is about boating. So this include then all small vessels and only talking about commercial small vessels under 25 gross tons and all pleasure vessels under 100 gross tons operating on sheltered waters. So sheltered waters and also proceeding to sea. So those sheltered waters example is the bays like Langebaan Lagoon and also Neisner Lagoon. Those are sheltered waters. But the small vessel regulations also include all vessels, and I mean all vessels, commercial and pleasure, any size that operating on inland waters. Those are all our dams. So as Carl pointed out, okay, our areas for South Africa is quite huge and there is hundreds of dams, and in all those dams you have these boating activities. So we basically, and the small vessel regulations of 2007 basically regulate all these small vessels on inland waters and going to sea. So basically the implementation of the small vessel, national small vessel regulations, and what the boating manager basically busy with is developing policy and conducting training on the safety regime. So also doing auditing and controlling of all external surveyors and safety officers. There's about plus minus 300 of them, and that's why I said, I mean, if it was not for the authorized agencies and these safety officers to be SAMSA eyes on all these inland waters, then we basically wouldn't have been able to fulfill our mandate. You also do the auditing of accredited skipper schools, auditing and controlling external appointed examiners for the skipper's courses and do the examinations, and then auditing the big 4 authorized agencies, which basically do the bulk of the small vessel surveys when it comes to pleasure vessels. Assisting local authorities for implementation at specific water bodies for the boating safety and local municipalities. We're also assisting them to implement the small vessel regulations on their local waters or their area of jurisdiction. Okay, what is the state of safety? Small vessels. So we all know boating accidents can happen as a result of mistakes made by people who try to operate a boat without proper instruction and without knowledge of the boat safety. However, below, as you can see, most of the common causes of accidents, and number one on the list there, not surprisingly, is the alcohol. And they just opened the alcohol now again today. So I think we're going to have an increase of the incidents again. During the ban, there was no fatalities. Okay, another big one is also the speeding. And believe it or not, that's why I'm a little bit hesitant when the senior examiner talking about adapting our training and bringing in more courses or whatever. It's not going to help, because all people must do, and a lot of incidents occur because people just don't keep a proper lookout. I mean, that is just looking through the window or looking in front of your boat. And that cuts across not only for small vessels, but even on bigger vessels. I mean, a typical example is the trawler that went onto the beach like a couple of months ago there in Saldanha Bay. Nobody kept a lookout. Okay? And the same even, I don't know if you heard about a big bulk carrier. So even that ran aground on Mauritius. Apparently there was nobody even on the bridge when the vessel ran aground. Luckily there was no fatalities, but there's huge pollution in Mauritius there. Okay, failure to observe others on the waterways. Operator distracted or inattention, distracted, I don't know, there's a lot of distractions that can happen on a boat, especially sports and recreation types of boats. But also on the commercial side, people are more geared to the fishing operations and pay a lot of attention to find where's the fish and how to catch the fish, instead of somebody keeping a lookout for other boats and the weather. Operators' inexperience, crowded waters, failure to observe the right of way rules, that's your collision regulations, obstructed and restricted vision, sharp and unsafe turns. That's because of speeding. People are speeding. There's a lot of small vessel incidents where people are actually seriously injured because of somebody that wants to show off how fast the boat can go, and then it lose control and damage not only his boat, but also other infrastructure in the harbor, and injure himself and also his passengers. Failure to anchor the boat properly, overloading the boat, especially the commercial types of boat, for the fishing, when they try to put too much fish on board when the fish is running, and unfortunately sometimes I don't keep that in mind, that you can't, the boat also got a certain capacity that it can load. Problems with boating equipment, including the hull or machinery failure. And a big one, of course, I think Carl indicated that already, our previous speaker, about the weather. I mean, one of the things that we need to do, inculcate in people, if the weather is bad, is not to be out there, rather be safe and be at home. Or if you do find yourself out there, make sure you come back to the port or a safe haven where you can anchor safely until the weather passes. Okay, this is the reported incidents, and as you can see there, this is the fatalities. Fishing fatalities are captured by the Center of Fishing. That's what Salvan was already indicated to you. So these figures basically below, or I'll show you a table later, that will indicate the fatalities only for small vessels. But as you can see there, 58, almost 60% of fatalities were caused from vessel capsizing. Now, there's either because of speeding, rough weather, people not loading the boat properly, and things like that. 25% of the fatalities were caused from grounding or collisions, and 17% of fatalities were caused from people falling overboard, which is quite common also on the small vessel. Most of the time when the boats are capsizing. Right, in terms of the Merchant Shipping Act, all incidents supposed to be reported to SAMSA. But I think Dr. Robertson from NSRI indicated in the chat that the figures even showed by Selvin is not really the true reflection of what happened. And it's probably the same for the small boats. Because like I think Nigel indicated, or somebody, a previous speaker, we can only keep stats or database, count the numbers of incidents that's actually reported to SAMSA, right? And that we investigated, and those are the incidents, casualties, accidents, and serious injuries that happened on vessels. So all incidents that where we have lost, abandonment, or